Hello everyone, today I have was Pluto Netflix's best work. So I actually just finished watching the show last night, and boy what a long night it was. 8 episodes that were 54 minutes to about an hour and 5 long. I'd also like to mention that the show is an ONA. That's typically common for an anime that's made outside Japan, like China, South Korea, and the US. It's just a format. Now, I'll be breaking down what aspects of the show make itself number one in Netflix's anime catalog. Additionally, I will play devil's advocate a lot because if you're just hearing a yes man, this video may be a lot shorter than you think. So, first of all, I'll flat out say it doesn't resemble anime that you or I would come to expect. It doesn't have the same art style or feel at all. Now, that makes perfect sense. It looks and feels like a comic. Even the OP, which is really short, has a comic design to it. Now, in my opinion, I think that's just a result of Netflix's magic touch on any anime it makes, but I couldn't say for sure. The show gives vibes of Odd Taxi, and I'll explain exactly why. The storylines are similar in the way of progressing 2 steps forward and then 1 step back while alternating between subplot lines that, when together, form the primary story. Both shows not only give off a Western feel, but flesh out their characters to such an ungodly extent. The viewer always knows the secondary and tertiary characters like the back of their hand, which really isn't common, especially in anime. Now, that actually highlights how well structured the airtime was in terms of allotment to each character. This boils down to the storyline and setup, both done extremely well. Before I continue, I do want to mention that if you haven't checked the show out, it's about the most recommendable thing on the market, possibly aside from Freerin. For anyone who doesn't know what the show entails, it's about robots, war, a detective solving murder mysteries, and the lives of the best AIs in existence as well as their creators. To be clear, I don't want to get too far into the synopsis, since I think if you haven't checked the show out, you might want to before you listen any further. So, as for the story, the first episode sets a very strong standard, a strong atmosphere that feels almost like you're watching Violet Evergarden. How, you may ask? Because the first episode has the feel of an episodic plotline that dives into the lives of secondary and possibly tertiary characters that you may never see again, but the effect of their stories slightly impacts the overall tone and situation facing the main character. Now, I will say main character and not main characters because it only feels like there's one main character, and that's Gaziked. While, yes, there are technically 2 main characters, the other one being Adam, his presence in the series is only that of any other secondary character. Not to diminish his relevance in the show, but only because of how well structured the airtime of all secondary characters are, his time in the show feels about on par with them, especially since, spoiler, his death caused his presence to be out of service in the show for about an episode or two. You may think that's not a big deal. Now, in any other show, you'd be right. But since this is only 8 episodes long and each episode is lengthy in its runtime, it makes the viewer almost forget that he's a primary character with a lot of potential to be had for the show's conclusion. Getting into the show's creation, it was actually an adaptation of the material from the old show Astro Boy. For anyone that knows old anime, they know this, or at the very least have heard of it. If you look at the characters list of these 2 shows, you'll not only see some similarities, but a close plotline to boot. What Netflix did was take an iconic older series and modernize it. They took something beloved and fleshed it out to an extent to where it's grown new legs of its own. Personally, I think that's valid to consider when thinking about whether this is truly the best material Netflix has made to date. The last thing I plan to mention is its ending. As many anime watchers know, endings are always the make or break material to any series. There's a lot of great examples I could mention, but I'll stick with only 3. What Pluto did in its finale was take the rising action and add fuel to the flame, make the stakes and intensity of it all go from a 5 to a 10 in an instant. Now, to break it down, this show at least cushioned the blow, but it risked making a mistake that so many great shows make. Pluto went from the objective of fighting one enemy to preventing the entire world from being destroyed. Giving credit where credit is due, it's a pretty bold move for the sake of a happy ending to make. A fight in episode 7 with the main antagonist and Epsilon the robot could have ended with Epsilon's victory. It was a very real possibility that never came to fruition. If that did happen, the show could have ended in only 7 episodes, most likely with the final episode being an hour and a half long. The key words are could have. Instead, the story was ended by the hands of Adam, who, yes, was a main character, but never necessarily needed to control the finale. In lieu of what I said earlier, I'll give some examples of when shows in the past amplified their endings to an unsustainable degree. The first is Assassination Classroom, specifically in its second season. While it goes from kids trying to pass exams to the entire Earth on the line, the setup at the very beginning of the series was in fact there. It wasn't an alien concept to the audience, and familiarizing the viewer with the level of intensity changing so rapidly did help the finale feel less extreme of a jump than what it was on paper. Another success story would be Gurren Lagann. To its credit, this show familiarized the viewer with long, expansive jumps of the main character's surroundings since episode 1. From being burrowed deep underground, knowing nothing more than the people directly near you, to being above ground, fighting enemies, and meeting new faces, it's another example of familiarizing the viewer to these extreme jumps and rising action early on. Like I'll be saying in the next example, that of which is the best known example of derailment in one season of one anime. This has to be Darling in the Franxx, an amalgamation of brilliance and ignorance almost simultaneously. This is the perfect example of what not to do. Now, to the credit of Pluto, even if it derailed itself to this extent, I do believe the material and plot lines it had prior would ease the amount of backlash it would suffer. Regardless, many people do remember a series for its ending. It felt like Pluto took steps to assure things wouldn't lead in a sour direction, but I at least thought it was worth considering and or referencing. In the end, this show did wonders for its audience. Not just that, it did wonders for its genre too. This had me feeling like I was watching an extended cut of Vivi. For anyone who's checked that show out, they'll know what I mean. All in all, this had so much going for it, not to mention the thorough artwork and animation. It felt like a true experience. But was it better than the main competition, Cyberpunk Edgerunners? I'll boldly say yes, but I'd love to hear what your opinions are. Down below. That's all for this one, and I'll see you next time.